Hey, it's KR of D&D Homebrew talking today about giving your dungeons a backstory. And not just one that kind of explains its connection to the world, but explains its very, you know, reason for its existence, right? And what I'm going to talk about here today is the 5-room sort of modern dungeon and why it would be placed in, wherever it is. And there's a thing about, fitting it to the geography. Maybe I'll do that one on that too. Maybe this is part one, because really what I'm thinking about is what purpose did this dungeon serve such that it's kind of out in a wilderness? Because if you have a dungeon below a keep or a dungeon that's really like sewers, below a city or, storage rooms or something, that all sort of makes sense. But I'm talking about the dungeon that the players discover, maybe some creatures using it as their lair now. And here it is, either cut stone, classic dungeon, or even a series of caverns, but have sort of, entrances and exits that are sealed and made such that it's not just a cave, right? It's something that is used by sentient creatures for some purpose. And it's fascinating because way back when, the old days of D&D, we were all doing dungeon crawls, right? And, we all knew that this was ridiculous, that there were these we would make these, I had a 12-level dungeon, hundreds and hundreds of rooms, elevators and portals. And it was just insane, like Dungeon of the Mad Mage sort of. Well, why? Why? And the Dungeon of the Mad Mage has, of course, Hallister, who's this insane wizard creating all this stuff, like a demigod. But we went through this period of like, how can we make this, the naturalism, the sort of, the dungeon ecology, and create sort of the Underdark became. Again, if you look too closely, it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't have to make sense, which is how we eventually came around. We got tired of running in the mega dungeons. We wanted to run in the wilderness, but we still liked the dungeon crawl every once in a while, with the torches and, going down these hallways and knowing something's going to be there and that kind of thing. All right, so I'm just going to give some ideas that you might think about to explain why this 5-room, either cut stone or very fortified cavern thing exists in the middle of the wilderness. And the first one is like a way station, like an area for soldiers of a realm. They're out patrolling, or they're traveling, to the far reaches of the realm, or for one to maybe at the edge, and they're going to go to another one, and they build a secure fortress, but underground or in a hillside or something like that, so that they can rest there. Maybe there's always a crew of soldiers, or was, because I'm thinking this could be long abandoned, right? Maybe it's operating. I've talked about that before with, a dungeon under a keep where the guy that runs the keep has his prisoners there. It's an operating dungeon. But here I'm thinking about one that has been long abandoned. But originally it served as an outpost. And I think about Weathertop in the Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings, as kind of this outpost at the edge. It was on this hill that they could see, the wild lands or whatever. So it could be that dramatic. It could be much more. That one was like a fortress built like a castle. I'm thinking of a dungeon complex. Again, maybe it's, like I said, the hillside or something, some natural terrain, maybe within these giant boulders. I've done that before, and they dug out this area. But it served that purpose. It has remnants of that purpose. And now, something has come along perhaps to either live there or bury their dead there, right? It's an abandoned place, kind of cool. And another classic is the Bandit Hideout. Right, this was built to be very difficult to see, hence the dungeon aspect, hence the, there's a little rise, or maybe there's some boulders or whatever, and they dug in there, or there was a cave complex, and over the years they created stone walls or fortified them to prevent them from collapsing. And so this hideout has all sorts of escape hatches, different, very hidden. And it might even have areas that, lots of secret door type things, bandits, if they have people that have that capability. Again, they could be very sophisticated, and they were going along some road, something like the Silk Road of history, where merchants traveled and they could pick upon them, then hide out. And when things died down, they could go into town or whatever and sell off their, fence all their booty. So I think a bandit was built for that purpose. Very sophisticated bandits. Now, another classic for the remote 5-room inexplicable dungeon is it is a prison, but it's a special sort of prison. It's a prison for the unkillable, for the super dangerous. It's like a tomb, but for something that, for whatever reason, a spirit, some cursed person or entity or something that they don't know how to kill it, but they can hold it within this place. The classic here is, what's the thing? There's a movie called The Keep, where they have basically, I don't know whether it's Satan or some demon, maybe it's a demon held in this monastery on the side of this hill. And these Nazis come along and start taking out the silver crosses that are actually holding it in. And then they release it, right? So the idea that you would build this underground chamber to hold this deadly thing is a fascinating one. And again, if the players don't necessarily have to be the ones that are messing with it, right? They come along while these soldiers or, bandits or greedy people have discovered it. And the players realize if they pull out these, the silver ingots, trouble's going to come. Or maybe it's time to finally get rid of this thing. Another one that I had before was a research outpost. This alchemist style wizard. This was before they had alchemists in the Dragon magazine, but that really wasn't a very good character. Well, maybe that was the alchemist. I can't remember. They had a research post out in the middle of the wilderness. And for whatever reason, they disappeared long ago. And this thing was, filled with all of these chemicals and these substances. And I think they had like a homunculi substance where it was like growing and slowly expanding, almost like a blob thing, as I remember. And it was starting to affect things. And so the players, or maybe it was in some other place, and the players had to go there and get the right chemicals, whatever. But it definitely, it had all these alchemical things, this research facility or there's all sorts of, like the simulacrons or homunculi, or I just been reading the Vance books where these wizards are creating life forms, or the Bride of Frankenstein, where he was creating life, what need do we have for the gods, right? Or God, we are gods kind of thing. So that this abandoned research center contains still remnants of this research that are now active or have been slowly percolating and now are potentially a problem. And along the lines of the prisoner thing is the idea of and I've talked about this before, where you have a gate. Oftentimes when you have planes or planar things, you'll have these Nexus Points, natural gates. So someone has built a dungeon there. And I think I talked about this in another video a long time ago, so bear with me if you've seen that. But again, the backstory of because the players are here and it's just a little 5-room dungeon. So you have an outer, and the classic thing is you got an entryway or whatever, and then you've got some hallways and some other rooms. And then you've got this central room, and I would have this steps down, and here's this gate. And it's got all sorts of locks, magical, hold portals and all sorts of spells on it, whatever, or does it. But that's what it was built for. It was built around this Nexus Point to secure it to whoever's powerful enough to build this dungeon and hold on to it with troops. Because again, you're not necessarily going to have this, it could be more useful not having this gate in the middle of the city. So it's not like you're going to let's build our city around this gate where something could pour in from, a plane of hell at any moment or something, right? But once you find out about it and, that we've realized, sir, this is a gateway to the 9th circle of hell or whatever it is. All right, we got to secure that. Got to guard it. Just like they're, holding the creature prisoner. You're controlling this node point. And of course, another one is where you have a sacred site for a religion, a god, a sacred grove, a sacred geography, a sacred lake, something like that, where you have a hermitage or monastery or whatever you want to call it, built out of rock. And these are very common. And, oftentimes hermits or, a monastery, the famous ones, I think they used them in the reboot of the Star Wars movie on this island. That was basically like a hermitage built in this island, right? So if you have a sacred spot, because of course in a D&D setting, a sacred lake, it's got powers. There's stuff going on there. So these priests are there to observe this, to, appease the gods, to do whatever. And they have fortified themselves because, like many sacred sites, it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's in the boonies. right? Because that's the thing about these. When I'm thinking of this 5-room dungeon, I'm thinking of it out in the middle of nowhere. Thereby, what is the answer? Now, again, if you have a Silk Road, a travel road, if you have the edge of an empire, it's like, how much of the middle of nowhere it is, but certainly a pilgrimage site, certainly a prison for some evil entity, or to hold a gate, something like that, can be out in the absolute middle of a desert, right? Could be a sacred oasis. Could be where the mode point is. Could be a perfect place to keep the deadly creature in a prison. Because can it make its way across, or an island, right? Because, Alcatraz, that was the reason that they put it on that island, was it was hard to get, nobody could swim it. San Francisco Bay. All right, so those are just some ideas. Think of more, but you're always, you don't, and I've said create a backstory. All of those are backstories to explain at some level why it's there. Do the players necessarily have to know that? I mean, you do. Yeah, my players tend to want to find out about stuff. They know the history. It all kind of ties in together, so they're always trying to find out what's connected to what. But they don't have to. Why? Because there's something there now. The gate is the gate. The creature being held is probably there in this prison. But a lot of times it's just whatever purpose it had, now it's something else is there, right? Something's been taken over. So you're just answering that question. Well, this is a pretty nice, clearly these kobolds didn't build this or whatever's there, right? But it was made here. Well, here's the reason. And you can have some clues or information. It just kind of links things together in a logical way. And a shout out to my Patreons. I did a thing on, speaking of layers, these statues in a Medusa's lair this week. Really enjoy that. I'd love to hear, do you guys justify your 5-room dungeons? Do you create backstories? Or you just throw them in there and who cares? And the players don't care. I don't know. And you can do it that way as well. And of course, like my videos, subscribe, all that good stuff. And keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose. Do some dungeon crawls because they can be fun. And tell somebody else about it.